Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's HCMX Radio, the only podcast in the HCM arena that weaves current market research, HR technology, and industry leaders into each episode. Our HCMX Radio host is our Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cook, the COO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our HCMX Radio Podcast. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for listening in or watching us today. I would like to warmly welcome David Proegler, the Managing Principal from Latitude. Hi, David. How are you?
Doing well, Rachel. Thank you.
And for those of you that may know David, he is the Managing Principal with Latitude, leading sales, client, and partner relationship development. David has nearly 25 years of results-driven leader experience in management consulting with extensive experience in the automotive industry and building and delivering solutions. So again, welcome. It's great to have you today. And just a little bit about the organization, about Latitude CG, home of Latitude Learning. They are the partner learning platform, which is designed for the unique needs of partner training programs to train the people that sell, service, and use your products. And that's our discussion today. We're going to talk about the unique environment or the unique impact that the pandemic has had on the extended enterprise. And before we dive into our discussion, it is a follow-up to the webinar that David Wentworth, our Principal Learning Analyst at Brandon Hall Group, and David Proegler collaborated on recently. The topic was From Activity to Impact, How COVID Has Changed Training in the Workplace. So we have a lot to talk about. And David Proegler, before we begin, can you just share a little bit more about your background beyond just what I had shared, just to ensure that our listeners get to know you a little bit better?
Certainly, I've been in the consulting industry and the technology industry for a long time. I've been 25 plus years, and I've been with Latitude for about 15 years. And our focus through that time, we were originally started as a consulting organization and made a transition to the learning space over 10 years ago. And my role through that has been both in the consultative side and the sales side, and I'm leading the activities now associated with making sure our clients have a great experience. And so it's fun to bring our focus in the marketplace to these conversations, and we think we're unique in the sense that we're really focused on the extended enterprise. We're really focused on the people that make, sell, and service your products, use your products, but most importantly, making sure that we're providing solutions that fit the marketplace for that purpose.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for diving into a little bit about your background. And hi, David Wentworth. Welcome. Thanks for joining me today in another discussion around, we've been having a series of these discussions around post-pandemic, pre-pandemic, during pandemic. And, we are in a unique, or our discussion today is going to be talking about the extended enterprise. We hadn't had too many of those discussions, so I think it'll be, a very relevant and timely topic to dive into. And I don't know who wants to start off with, but can you elaborate a little bit more about what you find, what has been impactful and unique to supporting the extended enterprise during our post-pandemic?
Yeah, and I'll jump in, David. And for clarity's sake, I can be Dave today.
Sounds good.
David.
That will be helpful for people who can't see us talking.
I should know that.
Right. So, I think that was one of the things behind wanting to extend the conversation from the webinar into this podcast, is that this is a unique environment that we're talking about. And I've obviously, as an organization, Brandon Hall Group's been doing tons of research over the last 12 to 18 months, trying to figure out what's going on from a COVID perspective and where organizations are headed. And, there's a lot going on, a lot of activity in all the research, but I find we talk about organizations in this abstract manner that 80% of organizations are doing this and 60% of organizations are doing that, and they're this generic organization, which in people's mind is a bunch of people in a building at desks. Suddenly pandemic, they all now work from home, and that's the end of the story. And how do we address that? And having discussions with David about the setting up for the webinar, and then when we had the webinar, really, it's eye-opening to realize that that's not the reality. Like the reality of most organizations is there's some other level of engagement that goes on. And then, David's role, the extended enterprise, you've got these dealer networks and these other sorts of organizations that it's one thing to try to wrap your head around, what do I do with my workforce who is now remote? It's another thing to say, I have this whole network of people that don't necessarily work for me, but I am reliant on to support my products and how do I manage them now that this world has changed? I never had direct control over them to begin with. And now what do I do? So I think this is a great discussion. And that's why I'm glad you're here, David. So if you wanted to sort of pick it up from there and just tell folks.
And great summary, because when you talk about those networks, one of those things that's a challenge in the extended enterprise is those people don't work for you, right? And so we look at this in a different kind of way in terms of what people are, what you're training. So think of a dealer network, make it real simple. We'll focus on that kind of structure. People that make, sell, service, and use your products, often represented by dealerships, right? So you're sitting there going, these people don't work for me, right? How do I get them the training? In a lot of cases, the other impact is, though, that training is really a lot of times hands-on. You have to be able to do those things. To learn to turn a wrench on a vehicle requires hands-on kinds of training. And so we looked at in the abstract, in the broader sense, as you mentioned earlier, Dave. People sent their employees home, and now we got to train them that way. Well, in the extended enterprise, we not only had they had to adapt the training content to be able to deliver it, but they had to suspend a lot of different things too, because they couldn't turn a wrench on a vehicle. So how do you resolve those issues? And that dovetails out into things like keeping people certified to be able to do warranty repairs on vehicles, and not wanting to sell vehicles that they can't service. And there are all sorts of different things that go along with that. And so not only was it the complexity of adapting the content and making sure you could transition quickly, but how do you address that hands-on need? How do you keep the certification and compliance pieces in check or on par with where they're supposed to be be compliant along the way? And the extended enterprise really that's one of the biggest challenges they faced. And we heard people that were adapting content initially, adapting like everyone did. But how do you address that other piece of it? How do you address the hands-on piece? How do you address the certification, compliance, and all the things that are necessary there? And how do you deal with all the outside organizations that are utilizing you? Because not only do you have to have your own practices to be able to deliver training to individuals, you also had to understand that the individuals may have other organizations dictating what they can and can't do relative to taking training. So you have all layers of complexity that are added to this model. So it really is a fascinating area to focus on with regards to how they're adapting along the way and what the challenges they were facing.
Mm-hmm. And what have you seen companies do to support these changes or the training?
I'll give a couple examples, right? There's large OEM, right? So large OEM, think about them taking years and years to actually adapt training materials, right? So what we saw happen was a fun story during these interviews. These trainers, literally Friday, they were sent home. Over the weekend, they're pulling cameras out, they're pulling videos out, they're signing up for Zoom accounts, they're doing all these things and figuring out how they can transition things they were doing in person to online. So they were really working very, very hard to adapt their content. What we saw a lot of organizations do was simply have a lot of grassroots efforts to be able to get this adapt technology to be able to do this. Was it perfect proxy or perfect replacement? No, but people were fighting to get it done. And what we saw often was mid-level managers and trainers going out, doing all this adapting very quickly, throwing stuff out, seeing what worked, seeing what didn't, throw it away, refactor, get it right. And then ultimately, as they perfected it, the large organizations coming over and adopting it, right? Making sure it became part of the mainstream. In this OEM case we talked to several of them, very similar stories. They had all this grassroots stuff going on. They adapted all the content. All this stuff was being done by trainers and mid-level managers. And now all that technology is mainstream part of their technical facility. So now they're actually utilizing cameras and other things in the training facilities to be able to create content. And there's some outcomes that come from this, right? Some benefits that came from this as well, which was the transition of that content that was being recorded now could be used as learning bites, as refreshers to training, those kinds of things. So that was a pretty common paradigm we heard out there. Quickly adapt from the trainers and managers, and then have the organizations come around. And in doing that, they were able to develop a new way to deliver this very focused kind of training. Isn't a perfect replacement. It doesn't replace the machines that are out there and actually putting hands on a vehicle, but that was what we saw a lot of, and it's pretty consistent right now across the board.
And
I
what
I
I'm
should
just
add to
curious,
that, Rachel.
what caused that adoption, or what was there something different in the type of the way the development was offered besides, because we've had virtual training before, we had blended learning before, and now in this environment, it's kind of the only way at this point. It's slowly starting to shift, maybe a little bit, but not quite yet, where we start seeing some in-person again. But what caused them to adopt certain learning over other certain learning?
Well, I think I think Dave's data with regards to the adoption of virtual technology across the board is pretty consistent with the organization we deal with. But their adaptation of their technical delivery really was vitally important, or is vitally important. Finding a replacement for that's vitally important for them. I think it's an area we actually candidly need to explore more. It's going to be an opportunity out there, because I think these organizations were not able to do everything they wanted to do with regards to that. Because look, you have augmented reality, you have virtual reality environments, you have all these kinds of things with regard, and they have not become mainstream yet. So they had to find different ways to do things, right? And we heard, and we've heard it with our own kids going to school, teachers starting out with one Zoom session. Now they have 6 cameras, one on a book and one on this and one on that over here. Well, they did the same thing in the technology space. They literally said, okay, we're going to tell you how to repair a set of brakes. And they had the camera on the instructor, they had the camera on the general view, they had the camera, the microscopic view, guy using a camera in his hand. So he could do what they possibly could with regards to getting as much information in the hands of the individual. So a couple things is, it's still not a replacement for actually doing a brake job in a car and showing you can demonstrate your competency, but it's a pretty good step forward without jumping all the way into virtual reality or augmented reality. So I think that's one of those areas that we saw. And then the other thing is that what we also heard was some of these improvements in technology even made the delivery of training in person or virtually better for the person. You could hear, you could see, and all the things would happen in the classroom. So kind of a fascinating evolution along the way.
Yeah, I think it's the idea of the adoption, like a lot of these things were available before, and I think it was like you were saying, David. I think most people or these organizations felt like, well, yes, it's available, but it's not a good analog for what we're doing. It won't represent, right? So we're not even going to try. And then the pandemic happens, and you're forced to try. And I love the sort of the grassroots part of it. And that is something I think is a takeaway from all this for any organization, extended enterprise or not, is as you're exploring these new ways of reaching learners in these new places, listen to them. Like how do the trainers, they're the ones that know how people are going to respond or how best to present this content. The learners know what they want. So pay attention to what's happening in the grassroots and improve upon that and build like you said. But I think your example to me is such a great microcosm of this whole shift in digital. Outside of the pandemic, this shift was already happening. It was happening glacially, but now it's accelerated. And the idea that it'll never be good enough. But now all of a sudden, the multiple camera angles, and I can see this operation happening in ways I never could before. Or even the little one, it almost seems like a throwaway when you think about it. But yeah, before I was sort of in the back of the room and I couldn't exactly hear what the trainer said when he was on this part. Now I can hear everything. Like it's all there recorded. And so there's this enhancement to it that now you realize, oh, there are ways, not only is this a suitable replacement for now, but this is actually better moving forward as we go on.
Yeah, it's not going away. I mean, I think I think uniformly everyone saw this like, hey, this works. And I go back to my earlier statement when the trainers started adapting. They literally said they want to train. I'm going to go out and do this. I turn a wrench on a vehicle. I teach people how to do those kinds of things. And they started making, they did it because they wanted to continue to train. And then what they realized was, oh, if we take this a step further, it isn't just a replay. It isn't just a stopgap. It could be a replacement. It could be a better way to do these things, right? And ultimately, I think you're going to see it in the tech centers. You're going to see it in the external trainings that are going on. They're going to continue to use it for that purpose. It doesn't replace turning a wrench, and it won't replace the organizations that have, look, you walk into a room and you're going to have simulators of. We talked to a large, one of the premier ice machine manufacturers in the world has a room of 30 machines that can computer generate all sorts of errors, right? And you send a technician in, they go through all their training, they go in, they turn a wrench, or they do the repair, and they can simulate across these things, right? You'll never replace that. But the idea of the things that lead into it, making a more blended, right, inserting this new approach into the blended learning environments that already exist, right? Many years ago, they stripped away the basic learning, and they said, okay, this is going to go to e-learning, and we're going to do those kinds of things. So you're getting the amount of your time you're out of a facility and doing your job, and you're in a training facility was reduced. That's always been the challenge in the extended enterprise. Reduce the amount of time someone was off the floor, a unique challenge in the space, right? Take a technician off the floor at a dealership. He's not earning money for the dealership. He's in training. So how do you reduce it? That's been something that's going on for a long time. So in blended learning, you're doing all the book work, you're getting all that stuff done, and then you're only spending, let's say, 3 days at a tech center. Well, guess what? With this introduction of this new approach, maybe that 3 days now turns down to 2 days, right? And you can even focus it more and more and more. And I think you're going to see that kind of evolution, obviously, when the other technologies potentially catch up or become more accessible for all organizations, right? You'll see that begin to take hold as well. But I think that's really one of the things we've seen during this discussion, during the pandemic, is like this new technology, this virtual meeting technology we're on right now, and the ability to adapt and make it do things is really has to be really considered a new training paradigm or new training modality that has to be leveraged across the way, very much so in the extended enterprise.
And you can learn so much by being in a virtual environment, especially if you have that ability to really embrace the information, and you're curious about learning. And you can, as you mentioned, they can prepare themselves if they do have to go at some point into an environment where they can actually touch and feel and test it out. And there's certain things, airplanes perhaps, and more critical environmental type of devices. However, there's a lot of devices, and there's a lot of even the most best trained technicians have gone through all the training, and they come to your house and they can't figure out how to fix your AC, and it's only a year old.
Right.
That sounded strangely specific and personal.
Well, maybe it's slightly exaggerated. However, but we can all relate to that, right? Or, how many times does the cableman or woman or person come to your house and your Wi-Fi is still not working that well? So I think there's something to be said about traditional learning and blending it with this type of learning, and we're already seeing a lot of success and impact with it.
It's kind of funny going back to the adaptation the organization went through. I mean, there are a couple of things you see. We had organizations. Again, you're not going to replace the 30 machines in a room for technicians fixing things. We heard environment organizations, they have a 5,000 gallon tank that creates spills and issues, and that you're never going to replace that. And by the way, oftentimes certification comes with that, so you have to be able to put hands on it at some point. And there's a whole other conversation out there that probably needs to be had about how those certifications and compliance rules were suspended or delayed, and that kind of stuff. And I think that's really a topic we want to explore a little further. We didn't spend a lot of time going into it. We brushed over a lot of cases, but we think that's really another topic to dig into. But the reality is that as you use if you can use the different technologies and adapt the content in a way that gives people the understanding, shortens their period of time being out of the office, make sure that they're prepared and as best as possible to answer the questions. You really have a new way of getting people trained and up to speed and verified along the way. So I think it's one of those areas that we're gonna have to really explore, and you're going to see explode. And it doesn't require investments in some really advanced technologies that are out there. I don't mean to say that AR and virtual reality are barriers, but they're certainly they take time. And the beauty of these technologies are, I could go down to Best Buy and I can grab 3 cameras and sign up for a Zoom account, and voila, I'm able to do what I wanted. I can train and do all this fancy stuff that I didn't think was possible before. And I really think it represents a great opportunity.
You know,
Absolutely.
I lit up a little bit when you mentioned the compliance and how it's a discussion to have, because I was literally thinking about this as we were talking. Is that's my next thing is, you mentioned how, oh, it's possible to take something that was maybe a 4-day workshop or program, and then it was whittled down to 3 with e-learning. But now with this kind of blend, you could get it to 2. Do you think, and like you said, this is another area of research you want to go into. It's something that we're looking into the new era of compliance training. Do you think it's possible that those bodies that are in charge of what those regulatory concerns will ever adapt, and so that their definition of compliance isn't 30 hours in a seat doing this particular training? Will they accept that a bulk of the training took place in a variety of virtual and digital formats with some sort of final practical demonstration of compliance? Because from our perspective, and the research says that works, that will work. But if that body that says, okay, you're certified, you're compliant, doesn't recognize that, then it'll never change. Do you sense that will ever change?
I think it will, but it really depends on who owns the certification, right? Or owns the requirement. We obviously, as you mentioned earlier, Rachel, the idea of having, pilots have to sit in seats 30 hours or whatever the requirements are, those will never change. Those are so rigid and that they're not going to adapt. Now, maybe some things leading up to it get changed, but the physical time, being in a simulator, being those aren't going to. The ones that are, if we go to an OEM who says, what does it mean to be certified as a technician on my vehicle, right? So are you level 1, level 2, master, whatever it might be? I think what you're going to see is those organizations are going to have to go through the analysis going, is it as effective? Are we getting the same amount of quality of service? Are we having warranty claims that are going up or down? Are we able to provide the same thing but still doing it in a virtual kind of way? So I think there's going to be a lot of analysis going on over the next couple of years as these programs, as we sort of thrash back to normal, because a lot of these organizations are going, we did it this way to transition, right, to cover COVID, and now, hey, it's freeing up, let's go back to normal, but no one wants to go all the way back to normal. How do we keep this paradigm in there? And so you're going to see a little bit of thrashing back and forth of a feeling, but ultimately, those organizations, whoever owns it, is going to have to decide, are they able to do that? Now, if there's a federal compliance component to it, I think they're going to have to realize as well, this hopefully was a one-time disruption, but I think they have to practically look at, was safety impacted? Was quality impacted? Were those things impacted? And they're going to have to look at this in a way that is, hopefully open-minded about it, because I think that's really ultimately what has to happen. Again, it's really who owns that certification is going to really drive that. I think federal, governmental kinds of things will be slow to change. I think organizationally, companies will be able to change much faster.
This reminds me a bit of the outsourcing training model, where when companies started looking at what do they keep in-house versus what do they outsource in a way, what are the things that are core to them versus some of the things that can be off the shelf. Not that this is the same thing, but this kind of triggers a little bit of that, some of those concepts of how you think about that model and how you build it and scale it.
I mean, if you look at, organizations that been training technicians for a long time, they get very set in their ways. It's fairly sedentary with regard, hey, next year's coming up, this is what it means to the products we're adding, this is the way you're going to evolve. Those guys, all of a sudden now you've introduced this new way of training. You've introduced this new thing that is called virtual learning technology. It isn't a virtual instructor-led session. It isn't a virtual, it is an instructor-led. It's something that's new and unique, and it has to be sort of thought about in that manner. But how do you now use this cool little tool, this new paradigm, this new training paradigm, and fit it into your program and continue to drive that down? Because the age-old question is, how do you eliminate the time someone's off the floor? How do you reduce it, not eliminate it, right? And matter of fact, one of the things that came from this, we also heard, was the benefit of these virtual technologies, not necessarily on the technology turning a wrench side of things, but more on the sales side, was that they were able to actually leverage by keeping them in the dealership longer, keeping them on the ground longer, and not making them go to a training center for 5 days or whatever the period was. They could actually go out and leverage the training they had that day. If it's customer interaction, they could practice, they could bring it back. And so there was actually a little more reinforcement going on directly. And that's obviously some of the softer skill areas, but it created some unique properties and unique opportunities for organizations to benefit from that, and students were actually better off for it. And I think you'd see some of the same things. If I'm learning how to do a brake job, I'm allowed to do a brake job, I'm watching it be done in video. Yeah, I still get to go certified, but I can walk in the floor, I've seen it. I'm better suited to go reinforce that training immediately. And oh, by the way, those learning bites that that were recorded off the session I just watched, I can go back and bring up in my phone. And that's actually one of the things that I think LMSs have to be better at doing, is be able to give those learning bites to people, quickly and efficiently, so they can go reinforce the training. Because I think I think these things all tie themselves together neatly. And again, I think it requires some exploration, but you're going to see a lot of evolution in this over the next, I want to say, probably 2 years. It's top of mind right now, and they're going to want to leverage it.
Well, great. Thank you, David. And Dave, I think that's a great way to wrap up for today. Lots of good advice and insights from your side and our research here. So I look forward to hearing what's next and some of the new research that's coming out from both organizations. Thank you again for sharing and joining us today. And thank you all for listening in. Take care.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel. See you.
Bye.
Bye.